Kilcullen isn't the first person to call the Iraq war a strategic screw-up, but he may be the first senior US military advisor to say that. From then until now, and the explosion of Islamic State militancy in Syria and Iraq, he argues the strategy has been wrong. And not just Islamic State. In Kilcullen's words, Al-Qaeda is back in the game in Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, Syria and Yemen. Now, with Russian support for President Assad again changing the landscape in Syria, Kilcullen ends with a warning to Western governments wanting to take on Islamic State. You can't fight without fighting. And David Kilcullen joins me now, and you begin this with a very rare thing, which is an admission of your own failure.
Absolutely. I mean, I think if we're going to think about the environment that we find ourselves in now, which almost undeniably is significantly worse than it was at the beginning of the war on terror in 2001, we have to recognise that a lot of the problem is of our own making. Not all of it, and it's not a partisan statement to say that. I mean, both parties have been involved in it. But yeah, if you want to get to the point where you can move forward, you first have to figure out, where you are.
So what are the failures that led to Islamic State?
I think very clearly the first major failure, which as your lead-in suggested, I described as the biggest strategic screw-up since the invasion of Russia by Hitler in 1941, was the decision to invade Iraq in 2003. There undeniably would be no ISIS if we had not invaded Iraq. The second big one was the decision to leave Iraq in 2011 without consolidating the political process that had started to move forward in the previous few years. And then I think the other two big failures were the failure to really react in any significant way to the violence in Syria, which your previous report was suggesting is, really a key trigger of the massive asylum seeker and migrant problem that Europe's facing now, and the way that Libya fell apart also in 2011.
And you suggest that, again, we've got the strategy wrong in Syria, because you say to fight Islamic State, you've got to fight.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we're doing here is a bit of a mismatch between goals and the resources we're prepared to put into to achieve those goals. And that's something that's been a consistent challenge ever since 2001. Again and again, we've put forward these very expansive goals, but we've been unwilling to provide the resources that you would need to achieve them.
But do you mean ground troops?
To be clear, I'm not saying that we should massively increase the resources. That's an option. Another option is to modify the goals, right? To think about what can we achieve with the resources that Western societies in the UK and US and elsewhere are willing to commit after 15 years of war. And if you continue to have a set of goals that are mismatched with your objectives, then it's a recipe for continued failure. I mean,
the costs either way, either in actual resource or in human resource, are going to be immense.
I think they're already immense. We've got 270,000 dead Syrians, 11 million displaced people. And of course, that's not leaving aside all the stuff that's happened in Iraq and Afghanistan and elsewhere since 2001. So I think it's about, at this point, it's about minimizing human cost going forward.
And where do you think Islamic State and Al-Qaeda, which you also say is resurgent, are moving next?
I think the places that I'm worried about, I think, and most people are aware of this from just simply watching the news, Afghanistan, which is likely to really suffer a significant challenge this year from both a resurgent Taliban and Al-Qaeda, but also from this new Islamic State presence in Afghanistan. Another big area of concern is Libya. And then in Southeast Asia, we're seeing the emergence of a whole new collection of ISIS-aligned groups.
And, I mean, what you're describing is something worse than we started with before 9/11.
Yeah, and as I say in the book, we now face not one, but two global terrorist organizations in an environment that's much less stable and much more fragmented than it was in 2001.
And what do you think that means for attacks in Britain and Europe?
I think there's a bit of a difference between Britain and continental Europe, but in both places there's somewhat elevated terror threat compared to what we've seen in the past. I think it is in fact significantly worse in continental Europe, but that's largely a matter of geography, right? Because it's basically a truck ride from Syria through Turkey into Eastern Europe.
So open borders will make things worse?
I don't think that it's that simple, right? I think what we're looking at here is a massive explosion of electronic connectivity in particular. When we planned the war on terrorism, it was before the smartphone, was before the expansion of the internet into the developing world. Now you can run a terrorist organization without any physical contact by exploiting those kinds of electronic connections. And that's one reason why we're seeing 10 to 12 times as many people become foreign recruits to ISIS as we saw even at the height of the Iraq war.
David Kilcullen, thank you very much indeed.
Thanks for having me.